welcome to this session. This is part of the AI evening. We are here to talk about how artificial intelligence drives the biomedical revolution, or what the promise of this biomedical revolution, how it can be realized with AI. And of course, AI is on everyone's lips, and not just this evening, because we are here, as I say, at this Falling Walls AI night. It's as a tool, it promises, is expected to revolutionize many aspects of research, innovation, but here we're going to talk about biomedicine in particular. We're going to talk about the potential of enhancement of diagnosis, treatment, personalization, healthcare delivery, and quite possibly much more. I have an amazing panel with me. The panelists will be discussing this potential of AI. We will focus on collaborative possibilities. We will focus on the European ecosystem, but also global level. And we will also discuss other aspects, key aspects, such as training needs, or ethics, or regulation, all of which are important in this context, and of course in broader context when we talk about AI. So let me introduce them to you, and as is traditional at these events, they obviously are not arranged in the order in which I'm going to mention them. But we have Professor Michael Bronstein, who is the DeepMind Professor of AI at the University of Oxford and Scientific Director of the Aithyra Institute. He's also a founder of multiple startup companies. And I'm hoping, Michael, that you'll tell us later the genesis of the name of the institute.
Oh, this is my job.
Oh, this is your job. You will tell us. Excellent. But I have a bit of a preview to that. Very interesting. Exactly. So indeed, we have Professor Heinz Fassmann, who is president of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. He's a former Austrian Federal Minister of Education, Science and Research, and a former professor at the TU Munich and University of Vienna, and vice rector at the University of Vienna. We have Professor Heather Harrington, who's professor of mathematics in Oxford and TUD. She leads the Algebraic Systems Biology Group and is the director at the Center of Systems Biology, Dresden, and at the Max Planck Institute. We have Dr. Patrick Kramer, who studied chemistry in many places, including Stuttgart, Heidelberg, Bristol, and Cambridge. He was previously a director of the Gene Center Munich and a chair of EMBL Council. But since 2014, he has led the Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Göttingen as its director. On the panel, I also have Professor Jan Ellenberg, who is the director of SciLife Lab, professor at Karolinska Institute, and affiliated professor at Stockholm University and KTH Royal Institute of Technology. He's previously served as senior scientist and head of the cell biology and biophysics unit at EMBL. And we also have Dr. Richard Socker, who holds a PhD in computer science from Stanford, is founder and CEO of U.com. Previously, he was chief scientist and EVP at Salesforce, and he is one of the most cited researchers in natural language processing. So really quite a formidable panel with a wide diversity of incredibly relevant experience. So I'm going to start off with you, Professor Fassmann, if I may.
Yes.
Because I said, as I was introducing everyone here, I did not say that you have direct experience in AI, but there is a very specific reason for which it's very relevant that you're here on this panel.
Yes, that is. And thank you very much, moderator, that you allowed me to sit down when I'm not speaking. She said I'm too tall for a panel like this.
You were not supposed to share this with the audience.
I have to say one word about the Austrian Academy of Sciences. This is not a PR, but I have to explain it because the German academies are differently organized. The Austrian Academy has 3 different pillars, independent pillars. One is the Hall of Fame, die Gelehrtengesellschaft, the wise man and woman. The second pillar, Austrian Academy, is a research funding institution. And the third one, it's a research performing institute like the Max Planck Gesellschaft. We have 26 research institutes, highly specialized. Some of them are really extremely successful. I remember Anton Zeilinger, Nobel Prize winner in one of our institutes. We have archaeology, from archaeology to cell research from A to Z. And now comes the next institute. That's our 26th institute, and the name is Aithyra. K-I in the biomedicine, that's the name. Apropos Aithyra, we ask the artificial intelligence, please give us a good name for such an institute combining artificial intelligence and biomedicine. And the answer of that artificial intelligence was Aithyra, a fictional daughter of the god of wisdom, Athena, and the god of medicine, Asclepius. So it's a wisdom to use new technologies for medicine. And Aithyra was born. And we found a founding director, Michael Bronstein. He's here. I will listen so carefully what he's planning to do. But nevertheless, I have to say, founding of Aithyra was one of my most important decisions in the academy. I'm happy that I have done it. I'm happy that we found some collaboration with the Boehringer Ingelheim Stiftung, and it's so important for the science, but also for Austria at all. And maybe we can talk a little bit later, a little bit more about Aithyra when I listen what he's talking.
Okay.
To be opponent against it, yes.
Great, thank you. So, Michael, I'm going to go directly to you because it makes perfect sense following this introduction. So, in addition to coming up with difficult to pronounce names for new institutes, what do you see from your perspective as the greatest potential that AI can help us realize in the context of biomedicine? I mean, there are some obvious ones I mentioned in the introduction. Of course, perhaps today, some of the most successful applications has been in diagnostics, especially associated with imaging. But you lead a whole new institute. Where are we going to go? Where's the greatest potential?
So I would say, if I were to dream big, so I would say that AI can help change the way that we do science. The very process of scientific exploration, scientific discovery, hypothesis generation can be probably gradually automated and be taken by the machine. So I think we're still at the very first steps of this, and probably experimental sciences, in biological sciences, it will take longer than in abstract sciences because we need the machine to interact with the physical world, but at least I would like to see the end point of this of this exploration somewhere there. Of course, it's a long way.
So that's really interesting. You made a distinction between some abstract sciences and more, what was the alternative phrase?
Experimental.
Experimental, okay. So experimental and abstract sciences. And let me bring it back to biomedicine, because that, to me, is, of course, very experimental. In that context, especially in biomedicine, when we're dealing with human patients, human samples, I'm going to push you a bit more. What about the potential? Where do you see, let's say, in the next year, the next 3 years, next 5 years?
So I would say drug discovery and drug development would be a very interesting possibility. So now with, for example, recent years Nobel Prize for AlphaFold, so we can design new molecules that can address potentially previously untargetable, undruggable targets in the pharmaceutical industry. So it means that we'll probably be getting drugs for diseases that currently have no cure. These drugs potentially can be personalized. The clinical trials themselves can be accelerated with the help of AI. So all the process that is very laborious and very expensive that now happens in the pharma industry potentially can be sped up and made cheaper.
Very important points. I'm sure we'll be touching on many of them as we go along. Patrick, can I ask you the same question about the potential of AI in the context of biomedicine? Where do you see the lowest hanging fruit, if I can use that term?
Yeah, it's a good point. Maybe, if we look back to the year 2000, human genome, and then what did happen 20 years back? Of course, then when you generate big data, and that was also then transcriptomic data, proteomic data, metabolomic data, then of course you also need bioinformatics, which was then developed. They learned the language of biology, and from that came systems biology. And did we live up to the promise? I would say to some extent. There's still potential. When you look how oncology was done, how people were treated who had cancer 10, 15 years back, it's very different now. When you come to the clinic and you have lung cancer, they will not treat everybody equally, but they will look what is the mutation. If they find the driver mutation, then either you get this kinase inhibitor or a different one or an antibody. So it has already improved, but there's still huge potential. And I would say with AI-driven biomedicine, we can, first of all, make full use of those data sets, but second, also make predictions. And third, we can learn, not only extract, but we can learn rules which go into expert systems to help the doctor to advise the patient. I can give a quick example, staying with lung cancer. When you get these PET CTs, maybe you have people in the family or so who would have a cancer, so you get a PET CT, and then the doctor looks at that, and when I saw that first, I couldn't believe it, because they would say, it's a metastasis here. And I could, I'm trained to look at medical images or scientific images, but I had problems to see that. And so machines will be better. Yeah. Because you can train them on, we know it from electron microscopy 10 years back when the new detectors came. Basically, there was algorithms developed that learn the structure of the noise, and they subtract the noise, and all the signals shine up. And so even a layperson can now see the signal. And those are examples. So there will be, it's not going to be, something entirely different, but it will be an acceleration of biomedicine after the systems biology, bioinformatics area. And it will also take us to a new level. So it is disruptive, not just incremental, but it's disruptive. But it doesn't mean that now something entirely different comes. It's rather that we start a phase of incremental science again after this big disruption, which was, by the way, exemplified by the AlphaFold Nobel Prize now. It's only 2 years back, I think, that this breakthrough was achieved.
That's right. It's really quite unusual to have a Nobel Prize so soon after the publications and this.
7 years after his PhD, he got the Nobel Prize, I think.
There you go.
His PhD was 2017, the John Jumper.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to do a similar plug to what you did for your academy. There is a really interesting piece that Nature published just a week before the Nobel Prizes were awarded. It's entitled "How to Get a Nobel Prize." It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek piece, but it really looks at the statistics of which discipline they were awarded in and the kind of, let's just say, demographics of those who received the prize. And therefore, it sort of tells you how to increase your chances, your likelihood of winning a Nobel Prize. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's quite entertaining. At some point, quite depressing again as well, but quite entertaining. But back to the discussion. So actually, interesting examples, right? Because you talked about really quite a shift in the way that we're going to do science in the context of biomedicine, but beyond. Then you talked about the more practical applications. You also talk about shift and then sort of a bit more of a plateau. But these two seem complementary to me. Richard, I want to turn to you. I read that you said somewhere that AI era is like the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and Industrial Revolution rolled into one. Can you explain that?
Yeah, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think we're starting now to get into the era of AI, and that it'll be a fundamentally different human condition that will come out of. Just like 150 years ago, over 90% of people worked in agriculture. No one wants to do that anymore, but that meant 90% of all jobs disappeared, right? And if you told that someone 150 years ago, they were like, that's scary, let's not do that. But it will happen, and I'm personally very excited in terms of this panel and the topic that AI will make, and this is part of the era of AI, what used to be scientific disciplines of just trying to understand reality and actually transform them into engineering disciplines. Like, I don't care as much about how cancer works as I care about how to fix cancer. And I don't care about as much about certain crystal structures as I care about creating new batteries with that knowledge. And so obviously one may come before the other, but I'm just incredibly excited to do this, especially in biology, where in 2020 I published the first paper on large language models to create proteins, for instance. And we could actually synthesize those proteins, and they folded, and they worked, and they had the antibacterial properties we want. And if you then combine the ideas of, ChatGPT, where you can say, oh, I can create a sonnet where every first line starts with an A, and the topic is biomedical research, and you realize that the same kind of technology can create a new kind of protein that will only bind to brain cancer cells, for instance. It's just that all of medicine will be very different in the next couple of years.
Really interesting answer. So I personally, although I no longer practice science, I consider myself a scientist. And there was something that was rising in me when you said, I no longer care how something works. Yes. I just want to fix the outcome.
I still care, just not as much as I care about fixing it.
Okay, perfect.
I care about both.
Yes, exactly. And ultimately, of course, that's the beauty of what drives us all, right? That discovery, and absolutely building on that discovery and improvement. But we also want to understand for the sake of understanding, and that, of course, drives us forward. I couldn't help but make that contribution. But you also made a number of interesting points that touch on topics beyond this conversation. For example, about the job landscape, right? Something that in other contexts is discussed a lot in the context of AI. And in my introduction, I mentioned training. I think it would be useful if we can talk about in the context of practitioners of medicine, but also in the context of researchers, what does it mean for us training the future generations? I think it's quite significant. I have a question for Heather and Jan. And maybe Heather, if you can take it first. So we talked about how to make the most of AI's potential, but what is it? Where is the real strength of AI? Where does it lie in the context that can be harnessed in the context of biomedicine, or for that matter, in wider context? We are constantly moving beyond biomedicine itself, of course, although that is our focus here.
So I'm a mathematician by training, and I moved into a biology institute a year ago. We are expanding into AI with another director soon. And so I think that the potential is actually across the disciplines of where we can discover new things, not only using already created AI tools, but those can make predictions, which then we can try to explain, validate, and test, and do this in a very, from a mathematical perspective, a robust, stable way that we can interpret what we are seeing as predictions. So in some way, I want to understand why and how we're making these predictions so that we can have this interpretability. And I think that goes hand in hand not only with engineering, but also the underlying kind of foundations where mathematics can come in. This is very important for biomedical research. We want to make diagnoses where it's not only a prediction or some model that has suggested this is the best course of action for a patient. We want to understand why that is, and have it be explainable and interpretable and robust.
He's looking for the why. No, go ahead.
So I think in some way it's the excitement, and I share many of the other panelists, that the excitement is also at the interdisciplinary, at the boundaries of disciplines, where I mean, mathematics is very, very slow, right, in many ways, but I think we can maybe kind of from behind help support and give new insights to things that are very successful already.
So it's interesting, as you were describing it just now, I was thinking that, mathematics is sometimes described as a language with which to describe the universe. And just now you talked about the interdisciplinarity and bringing disciplines together. Could AI do that? Could it become a common language from across disciplines? There's a no there.
No, I hope. Well, already you can use AI in different languages and use it to translate actual. I'm not a German speaker, but I moved to Germany, and you can actually use AI to translate things as well, right? So right now this is language to language, but I think in mathematics there's many different ways, but right now there's a lot of ways that mathematics using theorems, right? And now assisted proof checkers, you can say something is actually true, where it's not something in science where you see experiments and you might see this a million times. That doesn't mean it's provably true. And mathematics can contribute. And I would think that across these disciplines, there's a lot of potential for finding new connections and new translations.
Yeah. And of course, I meant language in that way analogous to mathematics, right?
Yes.
So in a conceptual sense. You didn't agree?
No, because language is not the right term for it.
Okay.
It's a common instrument. It's a common instrument to use empirical data, historical data, empirical observations. But it's not a language, it's a tool. And you can use that tool for quite different disciplines. Therefore, it's fine, it's wonderful, and it's revolutionary, no question about it. But it's not a language.
Okay. A fair point. So Jan, I promised I will come to you with this question. The real strength of AI, where does it lie from your perspective when we're talking about revolutionizing biomedicine?
Right, so I'm not a mathematician, I'm a molecular cell biologist, and so for me, the beauty of AI, it can deal with very large data sets, with very weak signals inside. And so that's what we have in biology, biological systems, and we composed of millions of different macromolecules. That's how we work and how our cells work. And so the big impact so far in biomedicine, I would say from a scientific perspective, has indeed been AlphaFold. This has been mentioned. We can predict now how one of these molecules gets shaped. But to me, the next big revolution, I think that's a disruptive step rather than an incremental step, is to be able to predict how does the fundamental unit of life, an entire cell, work. Can we predict what that will be? How will it act? What will its structure and function be? Can we build a model that can deal with millions of macromolecules inside one living system and predict function? And I think that, if we do that, that will fundamentally change medicine. And I think it's exactly as Richard said, that will give us engineering access. Because if these models then explain something and don't just predict like a black box, and that's unfortunately so far what AlphaFold does, it says this is what the protein will look like, but I have no idea why. But if we predict a cell, we probably want to say this is what it will do, and that is why. And if that why is molecular, we can change it. And that means we can prevent the cell doing that and direct it doing something else. And that's a completely new access to medical problems. Yeah, so I think there is, for me, the next big thing after AlphaFold is AlphaCell, that we think about a model where we can actually do that. Yeah, and that is very challenging, I think, for the mathematicians, but also for the biologists, because we don't even have all the data. We don't have the data that AlphaFold was built on for cells. There's a lot of work to do to achieve that.
I love that.
AlphaCell, you had it here first.
Any domain that we can simulate, AI will be able to solve every problem in that domain. And you look at AlphaGo, like the game of Go, is pretty easy. Chess is pretty easy. Programming is quite easy in some ways too. But once we can simulate a cell, then AI can just infinitely many times train and test hypotheses and try out things, and then it will solve a lot of problems in biology. It'll be really exciting.
So let me just run with this. And I loved your description of really quite definitive, perhaps that's not the right word, but real modeling of what goes on in the cell. And of course, it's such a complex fundamental unit,
yes,
but such a complex unit. What's the time frame? When will you be able to stand here and say,
We've got AlphaCell.
Yes, we've got AlphaCell.
Well, first version, I would say 3 years, but that will be very rudimentary. Yeah, so it will not be able to do many things, but it will give us an idea of what can be done based on the data foundations we've got now. And it will tell us especially where is the data we don't have and that we need. And I think that's exactly what Michael also said. I think we need to use the models to guide the data production, to say this is the type of data we are going to need. We're lacking functional data, we are lacking temporal data, spatial data. Go there, make it, because then I will be better in predicting this. So I think starting is now, and then use the models to inform us what is the data we are missing.
And I guess, Jan, you may need standards because you need the international collaboration.
Absolutely.
The data need to be comparable so the learning will work. So how far is the community? Because AlphaFold, right, was based on a collection of 200,000 protein structures collected over 50 years.
Yep.
And actually there the format, every digit is known, right, to the computer. This is standardized file. Yep. So how far is the community?
Well, I would say if we now, PDB was not created for AlphaFold.
No.
So it was created for structural biology. I think now if we want to create a cell database for AlphaCell, we would probably from the beginning share the effort. This is a huge community effort. It indeed needs data that is standardized, that can be shared, integrated. But we know how to do that now from the genomics, from the proteomics, and even in imaging, we have data standards.
And there are, of course, ongoing efforts, the cell atlases that are being prepared as we speak. Many of them already exist, of course, and proceeding. And, again, as you were describing that cell model, I'm thinking, then in the context of biomedicine, maybe you perturb that system in a pharmacological way. So you apply a drug, and then you can predict what the reaction will be. And of course, again, we're talking about a limitation because you're talking about a cell. A patient is not a cell. There are many, many more variables, but the 3 years is quite an interesting prediction. Richard, I'm going to give you a really easy task of asking you, when do you think we'll be able to model using AI the kinds of things that that Jan is talking about at a cell level? I'm going to make it easy for you at an organ level, not a patient level, at an organ level.
In a weird way, it's actually very timely. I just finished an investment a few days ago in a company called Parallel Bio. They are able to build tiny organoid lymph nodes in a Petri dish, thousands and thousands of them in parallel. And they already got FDA approval to shave off 3 years from a drug development cycle. At full scale, that one company could probably save 100 million plus animal lives so that you don't have to test certain drugs in animals. And you can not only collect data more quickly, you can eventually then build foundational models for an entire lymph node and an organ. And the fact that we can have a human-like organoid, like a mini lymph node in a Petri dish, and with robotic process automation and so on top of, will mean that we can collect much more training data more quickly than anything in the past so far, which will speed up the whole cycle.
Mm-hmm. So, Michael, the institute that you're heading, we just heard about the ambitions, we had some timelines, cell level, organ level, obviously ongoing data collections already. What are the key priorities for the institute?
Yeah, so I think what we want to do is to co-develop experimental technology with machine learning technology. So if you look at the data, right, and data is really the key topic that we heard until now. So the huge amount of data that was used to train systems like ChatGPT, or a relatively small amount of data that was still extremely expensive. I think PDB, the cost is estimated between 10 and 50 billion and almost 5 decades to collect. That's what was used to train AlphaFold. Most of this data was developed by humans for humans. So the end user is a human scientist, a structural biologist that can look at the protein structure and understand what's going on there. If we believe that in the future, increasingly more of the scientific process will be done by the machine, we need to think of a new generation of data sources, experimental technologies that produce data that target the computer, target the machine learning algorithms. And it means that we need to co-develop experimental technology with machine learning systems, and that would be one of the priorities of the new institute. We would like to reopen some big questions in biology to see which problems are amenable to machine learning, can be addressed by these methods. where the data production can be probably accelerated by orders of magnitude, or made cheaper by orders of magnitude. We don't want to spend 10 billion in 50 years. So we want to make it probably 6 orders of magnitude less.
And are you able to share with us some of these questions that you may be thinking about already?
So this is still ongoing. So we just started in September. So we want to carefully select the problems. Biology is very vast landscape, obviously. So we want to place our bets well. But I think, for example, if again we take molecular structures, so there we can probably change the way that we acquire data to make it useful for machine learning, not necessarily understandable by humans. So it will be some sort of black box data, but it will be way cheaper and high throughput.
So throughout all the answers, there have been 2 themes that you variously weave through your answers. One is, Heather, I think you made that point most strongly about the robustness and the sort of the mathematical underpinning, and I'm not sure if you used the word transparency, but I sort of somehow heard it in my head. And then the other one is data, of course. You all talked about data in some way, and you just very beautifully talked about revisiting some of the problems to think how AI can co-create or co-identify what data are needed and how to identify them. So most of the time, when I think we all read about AI tools, we hear 2 things. One is that we don't really know how, especially with generative AI, I should say, we don't really know how the answers are arrived at because it's a black box, and I quote, right? The black box is a term that's being used all the time, or a lot of the time. And then the other one is that, of course, data are the limitation because the answer is only as good as the data. Now, we're talking about biomedicine here. These are very sensitive, ethically sensitive issues, issues where you may not have a buy-in from communities, from patients, from insurance companies, and many other stakeholders. Can I ask someone on the panel to? You're happy to. I haven't told you what I'm going to ask you to do yet. I mean, 2 things essentially. How do we solve the data limitation problem? Is the solution what you were just describing? And then the second one is, how do we shine the light into that black box? And is there in fact a black box? Is it just a term that communicators and journalists like to use?
So the second question is quite simple. There's a new research area called machine behavior. We have one very famous researcher here in Berlin. So the idea is basically it's the reverse Turing, it's in my words, right? A reverse Turing test. So instead of testing humans whether they can make a difference, actually we look how, we try to find out how the machine solved the problem. So how did the machine learn those rules? And because we cannot spell them out, right? And it's a whole research field. So that is one thing. So there must be some emergent phenomena or maybe it's also too much for us to understand. But in the end, since it's mathematics, it should be traceable. And so that's a research field. Now, the second point I find actually even more interesting, and that is how do we get all the data? How do we within our societies make sure that people are not afraid of AI, but that they are willing to provide their data because they see the benefit. And that is all about trust, right? And the EU, that's actually brings me back quickly to the institute, Aithyra, because not only is it an international collaboration, I see here actually President Staudinger from Dresden, and Heather is also from the Max Planck in Dresden, so they will have a new department that actually is associated to that institute, and that is the whole, or most of it. I mean, we are spending also money, but the core funding comes from a foundation, from Boehringer Ingelheim Foundation. And why is that so important? First of all, we're not fast enough if you only take the state money. We need private money. Second, this money needs to be independent of commercial interest. Because what we didn't discuss so far is that industry last year, I know that was 2021, I think, overall spent 350 billion on AI developments, whereas in the US, I think it was 1.5, and the EU was 1 billion. So you see that most of that research and development is actually done by the huge companies like Google and the others. And what we want to do, of course, is to develop AI just based on our scientific curiosity and without having in mind, do I have a big enough market to get the revenues or any like that? So we have to convince people that it's a good investment and that they should trust the science because there's no commercialization behind. Then later, if something beneficial for society results, we can do a startup, and that is, I think, also the idea, this culture of having startups and then to provide that back to society. And I think this circle we need to close.
Thanks.
May I follow?
Yes, of course.
And disturb your order? No problem. You said modeling and data are the two key issues in that field. I would say it's a change of scientific culture, of the culture for scientific work is another challenge in coming in that field. Because it's clear you need much more interdisciplinarity than before. You need larger teams than historians or geographers would work. And you need data. And to get data, you need international collaboration. So you have to think big in that field, much bigger than in other fields. That's my impression. I have no idea what you are doing in reality. But I have my ideas concerning research policy. And therefore, I think big, think European, make corporations much more than before. That is a necessity for that field.
Terrific comments. I'm loving this conversation about collaboration and also across sector collaboration, right? Because so much of the research we talk about happens in the private sector, as you said. You mentioned Europe. I think we should think beyond Europe as well, right? We're really going to think big. But Heather.
So I agree to think very big, but also to make advances, we have to be very concrete. Think about AlphaFold. It's something very concrete. And in biomedicine, if you have a biopsy, right, the doctor gets that one biopsy. But, and so there's one measurement that you get. But then there's different ways that you can simulate, right? Different rules, which is what we've heard. There's different rules for simulating, maybe how that biopsy would change if it's cancer, for example, what type of cancer. So you can take that and put it into that one picture and simulate many different possible scenarios based on mathematical and computational modeling, for example. So then that gives you a whole variety of possibilities, and you can learn from this. But then the next question is, once you make this prediction with AI, how do you test and verify? And this is your question as well, going into when you use some type of language model, right? It's almost a probabilistic next word, but we want to understand why, what's underlying it. And I think there you need to have some proof, some theory underlying it and understanding what's happening. And obviously, mathematicians don't come to the table all that often. We're usually hidden away on a board. But I think that's where this interdisciplinary can come in, where we can contribute to this.
You should absolutely be at the table. Michael.
Yeah, I want to just, it's interesting that nobody brought up simulations yet, but this is really how we produce data in many fields, especially in fields where we have a good mathematical model of the system. Now, this is not the case in biology, or at least not at certain scales of biology. So we have usually at the lower scales, of the scale of molecules maybe, we have very good description of how these systems work, but we cannot apply these methods to simulate bigger systems. So a cell might contain quadrillions of atoms, right? So we cannot apply the same computational tools that we use to simulate a single protein like molecular dynamics. So it means, so that's why AI tools are powerful, that essentially they reverse the usual approach to writing software. So instead of coding the instructions in the computer based on our best understanding of the problem, we start with the data, with examples of behaviors of the system, the input and the output, and then we try to infer in the form of usually a black box or maybe a gray box how the system works. So it doesn't have a human interpretable structure. Now, the simulations, basically, you can argue that because they're based on our best understanding of the problem, in many cases this understanding is too simplistic. So we can argue that we are working very hard to solve correctly a wrong problem. This is true, for example, from problems like molecular dynamics that predict how proteins fold or work in not only in space but also in time. And these potentially can be accelerated or even replaced entirely by machine learning models, by AI systems that generate some outputs. And if you can test whether this output is correct or wrong, you can generate more examples until you get the right one. So this potentially reduces the complexity by orders of magnitude. It's a different paradigm. It replaces a mathematically correct problem with something that sometimes can be wrong.
So I'm going to open to the audience for questions in just 1 second, but I have one final question for you, and any one of you can take it. So much of this conversation has been much closer to the bio than to the medicine. If we are going to see a revolution in biomedicine, then the patients are going to have to trust the solutions, the diagnostics, the treatment, the delivery that is going to be enabled by this AI revolution. How is that going to happen? How are we going to gain that trust?
I don't want to talk too much, but I can.
Research results, like you describe what's happening and you show the data, and it's just like how we always have done it in the past.
And it hasn't worked.
And it hasn't always worked, right?
Sure.
But I think it's correct. I mean, openness, that there's transparency about the data, also about the models. I think very important that the algorithms and models are also open. But in the end, I think in medicine, it has to work. It has to improve the outcome for the patient. Yeah, we are going to use AI-driven prediction of biological system to improve diagnosis initially, but hopefully after that also therapy. And the question is, do you address a clinical problem? Do you actually improve the lives of the patients affected? And I think when that happens, they will trust it. And I think that's really the key step, and I think we see that with other new types of therapy, with gene therapy, where also people initially had many concerns. There was a lot of fear about this. Now this is working for certain diseases, and everyone is using it. Immunotherapy is another example, where you create GMOs for medical use. No one will eat GMOs, but people will be happy to be cured by GMOs. Yeah, so I think in the end, you have to address the health issue. And if AI enables that, and I really absolutely believe it will accelerate a lot how we can do that.
Patrick and then Richard.
I could say a lot of things, but the most important is people don't trust machines or algorithms or anything virtual. They trust other people. And this is why such events are important. This is why you need to know the scientists behind the science. And they leave them and do their science, but know that they are doing the science for the good of humanity. And by the way, Christiane Weiss-Solimena is preparing together with our scientists, asking them, how do you want to develop AI within the Max Planck Society? We have a few rules that we come up with. They will go to our Senate rather soon, because the European AI Act is regulating AI, but there's a research exemption. And this is very important, very good, because we want to go full speed. But it also means that we as science organizations need to be sure what are the parameters under which we want to develop AI, that we as scientists agree on. And one of them is, for example, that any final decision is made by a human. And by the way, this is important for medicine, that it's not going to take away the scientist or take away the doctor. It's going to be expert systems that advise you, and then the patient and the doctor have more time to talk about which option they choose, because they get help with the literature, with the interpretation of the imaging data, the sequencing data, and so forth. And by the way, you don't miss literature because you can update it all the time. And so you will always have the full knowledge available in these machines.
Very quick comment.
It's not super quick, but so I want to talk about a paper that really excited me, that spans bio and medical, and where ultimately you look at the data and every patient would be like, yes, I want this. The idea was as follows. You can create these tiny carbon nanotubes, tiny molecular tubes, and inside this professor in Toronto stuck a bunch of iron molecules. And then on the outside of that carbon nanotube, he coated it with proteins that would only bind to brain cancer cells. And then he injected mice with brain cancer with a bunch of these tiny little carbon nanotubes. They're like smaller than a cell. They then bound to the brain cancer only, and then he put the mouse into a magnetic field. And then, because of the iron molecules inside, he could make the carbon nanotube spin around. And he essentially created a tiny scalpel, thousands of them, that would only act on one cell at a time. And if you just realize that with AlphaFold and some of the large language models that my team and I had created since 2020, and other people have now scaled up even further, we can create all kinds of different proteins that will go to any kind of cell. It's just very, very exciting. And in their research papers, they showed the cells, the brain cancer cells, were destroyed afterwards, after the carbon nanotubes attached to them. And I think like when you see that kind of research, any person should be very excited who's ever lost anyone to cancer.
Beautiful example. We have time for one question from the audience after all this. Is there one question? There's a question there. If I can have a microphone there.
Hi, my name is Nolan, MD PhD student from Canada. So I'm new to AI. I don't know really anything about it. I came here to learn. And I think something that I'm noticing in the medical field is, what you had said is the hesitation, the fear from the patients, not really being able to trust it. You had said patients are going to trust it when things are working and when we, I guess, show our results. But as we've seen in the past, that kind of makes it's not as successful as we'd want it to be. And I guess the comment is this has been a very humanizing event. The whole Falling Walls event has been, where we've been able to see this side of the scientists, see what people are thinking. The question is then, how do you plan on humanizing AI?
Great question. How do we humanize AI? Would anyone like to take that? And only one panelist, please.
It's kind of asking like, how do you humanize computers? Yeah. Everything, AI is going to be in every single industry, from tractors to biomedical research to sales, service, marketing, like anything any company does will be AI. So all of us, all of you will humanize AI because you will use it and you'll make it your own.
And is it necessary to humanize it if the last decision, as Patrick Kramer said, the last decision is made by the doctor? So that's a human being who decides at the end of the street.
Yeah, interesting. Go on.
I just wanted to add one thing. So I would like to think of AI as the next level of abstraction. So if you take writing software as an example, so 50 years ago we're writing binary code and then assembly and then maybe functional languages and then object-oriented languages. So in the future, software will be written in plain English with a few examples of input and output. So it doesn't mean that the software engineers will disappear. They will be more productive, they will be using different tools, so you rise to the next level of abstraction. So same thing you can say about medicine, same thing you can say about sciences in general.
Great example, because of course coding, AI already is simplifying coding so much. So in the great tradition of these panels, I have one final question for each one of you, and I would ask you for a single word answer. One word, okay? So the question is about the falling walls, right? So think about biomedicine. We're talking about revolution in biomedicine. What is the wall that AI is going to help us break down to achieve affordable, efficient, effective biomedicine?
Cross-disciplinarity to achieve it.
What can I say? Alpha 7.
Okay.
I wanted to say the same, but Patrick.
That's okay, it's allowed.
I actually agree that we need a cross-discipline to do each of the levels, so yeah.
Okay.
Foundational models of reality.
Oh, wow.
Enthusiastic young talents like here on the panel.
That's more than one word.
But that's okay. Last word is allowed. Thank you so much to all my panelists and all of you. We covered a lot of ground. We didn't cover everything that I was hoping to cover, but this is such a rich topic. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you.